Daisy Carter was an orphan girl who had spent her entire life believing nobody wanted her. Then one day, a stranger died and left her an old house she'd never seen before. She almost sold it, until she discovered a locked gazebo hidden behind the property, and beneath it, a secret so heartbreaking, it would make her question everything she thought she knew about love, family, and the man who had been watching over her in silence for 23 years. What Daisy found behind that door wasn't money. It wasn't treasure. It was something far more precious. And if you stay until the end, you may never look at the people you love the same way again. Everyone in Willow Creek knew Daisy Carter, not because she was special, but because she was kind. At 23, Daisy worked at Miller's Diner 6 days a week. She remembered birthdays, brought soup to sick neighbors, fed stray cats behind the grocery store, and every Thursday, she visited St. Mary's orphanage with bags of cookies she baked herself, the same orphanage where she'd spent her childhood. The sisters used to tell her, "You have the biggest heart we've ever seen." Daisy always smiled, but she never told them the truth. People who grow up without love often spend their whole lives trying to give it away, because they're terrified no one will give it back. Daisy was abandoned when she was only a baby. No family, no name, just a tiny girl wrapped in an old towel. Sister Margaret named her Daisy, because even after storms, daisies somehow bloom. And Daisy did bloom. She laughed easily, helped everyone, and cried only when no one was watching. Every birthday, the children at St. Mary's made her cards. Every Christmas, neighbors brought her pies. Everyone loved Daisy. But love is a strange thing. Being loved by everyone is not the same as belonging to someone. Some nights, Daisy would sit alone on her porch and wonder, was there ever a moment when someone held me and wished I'd stay? Or was I forgotten from the beginning? She hated herself for asking. But some wounds don't disappear. They just grow quieter. Tonight was her birthday. 23. She blew out her candles and made the same wish she'd made since she was 8. Please, let there be someone, anyone, who's glad I was born. She smiled afterward, embarrassed by her own hope, unaware that across the street, an old man sat inside a silver sedan, crying. A stack of birthday cards filled the seat beside him. 23 cards, one for every year of Daisy's life. Not a single one had ever been sent. 3 days later, he would die, and Daisy Carter would finally discover that she had been loved all along. 3 days later, Daisy Carter was folding napkins at Miller's Diner when a man in a charcoal gray suit walked in. He looked out of place, too polished for Willow Creek, too serious for a Tuesday afternoon. Daisy wiped her hands on her apron and walked over with a smile. Table for one. The man stood quietly for a moment, studying her face. His expression softened. "Miss Daisy Carter." Daisy nodded. "I'm Henry Lawson. I'm an attorney." He reached into his briefcase and handed her an envelope. "I believe this belongs to you." Daisy frowned. Nobody ever wrote to her. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with her name written in neat handwriting. No return address. She looked back up. "I think you've got the wrong person." Mr. Lawson shook his head. "I don't." His voice grew gentler. "William Hayes passed away 3 days ago." Daisy stared at him blankly. The name meant nothing. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I don't know who that is." A strange sadness crossed the attorney's face. "No," he replied. "I suppose you wouldn't." That evening, Daisy sat alone in her tiny apartment above the laundromat. Lucky slept beside her while she read the letter for the 4th time. It was short, almost painfully short. To Daisy Carter, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I have left my home, my belongings, and everything I own to you. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but if you can, please come home. There was no explanation, no signature except William Hayes. Daisy turned the paper over. Nothing. She laughed softly. Home. The word felt foreign. She had never had one. The next morning, curiosity won. Mr. Lawson drove her to the property himself. As the car wound through the outskirts of Willow Creek, Daisy watched the scenery change. Small houses gave way to wide fields. Bare trees stretched toward the winter sky. The road narrowed. And finally, the car stopped. Daisy stepped out slowly. In front of her stood the oldest house she'd ever seen. A sprawling white farmhouse with dark shutters and a wraparound porch. Time had worn it down. The paint peeled. The porch sagged. Vines crawled along the walls. Yet somehow, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt lonely, as if it had been waiting a very long time. You own all of this now, Mr. Lawson said. Daisy looked around in disbelief. Why me? The attorney hesitated. For a moment, Daisy thought he might answer. Instead, he simply said, I think Mr. Hayes hoped you'd understand one day. Inside, the house smelled of cedar wood and old books. Nothing had been moved. A pair of reading glasses sat beside an armchair. A mug rested in the kitchen sink. A blanket lay folded neatly over the sofa. It felt as though someone had just stepped outside and forgotten to come back. Daisy wandered from room to room. The walls were covered in photographs, landscapes, sunsets, birds. But strangely, not a single photograph of William Hayes. Not one. It was as if the man had erased himself from his own life. That's odd, Daisy murmured. Then she noticed something else. Every clock in the house had stopped. All at the same time. 8:17. She shivered. That's creepy. Mr. Lawson smiled sadly. That's the exact moment he passed. For the next hour, Daisy explored every corner. The attic, the basement, the old study, until finally, she stepped into the backyard and froze. At the far end of the property stood a small wooden gazebo, circular, weathered, covered in ivy. It looked ancient, but what made Daisy's breath catch was the door. Gazebos weren't supposed to have doors, especially not heavy iron doors, and especially not doors locked from the outside. She walked closer. Lucky trotted beside her. The winter wind stirred the branches overhead. Somehow, the air felt different here. Still, almost sacred, a rusted iron plaque hung above the doorway. Daisy brushed away years of dirt. The words beneath made her heart skip. Only open when you're ready to know. How deeply you were loved. Daisy read it twice, then a third time. Her throat tightened. Loved? By whom? Why would someone write something like this? And why? Did it feel like the words were meant for her? A strange ache stirred inside her chest. The same ache she'd carried since childhood. The ache of unanswered questions, of empty birthdays, of standing at windows waiting for someone who never came. Lucky whimpered softly beside her. Daisy looked down. The little dog was staring at the door, tail tucked, ears low, as if sensing something she couldn't. The lock was old, heavy, and hanging from it was a faded red ribbon, for reasons she couldn't explain. Daisy reached out. Her fingers trembled as she touched the ribbon. A memory flashed. A little girl, 8 years old, blowing out birthday candles, making the same wish she'd made every year. Please, let there be someone. The wind picked up, and for just a moment, Daisy had the strangest feeling, as though somewhere nearby, someone was holding their breath, waiting for her, not to find a house, not an inheritance, but the truth. And somehow, Daisy knew whatever lay behind that door was going to change everything. Daisy didn't sleep that night. The words on the plaque followed her back into the house. Only open when you're ready to know how deeply you were loved. Loved. The word felt almost cruel. People didn't leave babies on orphanage steps if they loved them. People didn't forget birthdays. They didn't disappear for 23 years. So why did her chest ache every time she thought about those words? Why did she keep hoping they were true? The house groaned softly in the wind. Lucky slept beside the fireplace, twitching in his dreams. But Daisy sat awake in the old study, staring at the faded red ribbon she had untied from the iron lock. It wasn't just a ribbon. There was something tied inside it. A key. Small. Brass. Worn smooth by time. Daisy turned it over in her hand. A tiny daisy flower was engraved on the handle. Her breath caught. That's impossible. How could a stranger know her name? Know the flower she'd been named after? Her fingers tightened around the key. Outside, snow drifted quietly beneath the moonlight. And for the first time since arriving, Daisy was afraid. Not of what she might find, but of what she might lose. Because if nobody had loved her, she knew how to survive that. She'd done it her whole life. But if someone had loved her all this time, how could she ever forgive them for staying away? The next morning arrived gray and cold. Daisy stood in front of the gazebo. Lucky paced nervously behind her. "You don't like this either, huh?" she whispered. The dog whimpered. Daisy smiled weakly. "Me neither." She slid the brass key into the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, click. The sound echoed through the silent yard. The lock fell open, heavier than she expected. "Hold her to." Daisy hesitated. Her hand rested on the iron handle. Suddenly, she remembered something. A memory she'd buried years ago. She was 8, standing by the orphanage window after her birthday party. Snow falling outside. And across the street, a silver car. An old man sitting inside, watching her. He looked sad. So sad. Daisy remembered waving. Just once, the man had smiled. And then, he cried. She never saw him again. Or at least, she thought she didn't. The memory vanished as quickly as it came. Daisy swallowed hard and opened the door. The inside was darker than she expected. This wasn't a gazebo. Not really. Wooden walls curved around a narrow circular room, and in the center, a spiral staircase descended into the earth. Daisy stopped breathing. What in the world? The air smelled of cedar, old paper, and something else. Something warm, familiar, like the scent of sweaters stored away for winter, like safety. Lucky refused to come down. He sat at the top of the stairs, whining softly. Daisy knelt and stroked his head. It's okay, but she wasn't sure if she meant it for him, or herself. The staircase creaked beneath her feet. 1 step, 2, 10, 15. The air grew cooler, quieter, until finally, her shoes touched a stone. Daisy lifted the flashlight and gasped. The room stretched farther than she expected. Shelves lined the walls. Hundreds of small wooden boxes, carefully arranged, each labeled with a name and a year. Martha Reed, 1968. James Miller, 1974. Sarah Collins, 1982. Some names belonged to children, others to elderly people, each box worn differently. Some decorated with ribbons, others scratched and faded. It wasn't a vault. It was a memory, a place where people had left pieces of themselves behind. Daisy walked slowly between the shelves. Her fingers brushed the edges of the boxes. Each one held a story, a heartbreak, a hope, and suddenly, she saw it. At the far end of the room, a separate door, white, unlike everything else, newer, and carved into the wood were two words, Daisy Carter. Daisy froze. The flashlight trembled in her hand. No, her voice barely existed. This had to be some mistake. She had never been here, never met William Hayes. So why was her name here? Lucky barked from above. The sound echoed down the staircase. But Daisy couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She stepped closer, then closer still. On the door hung dozens of tiny paper stars, yellowed with age. She touched one gently. A date? December 14th, 2009. Her 11th birthday. Another star. December 14th, 2012. Another. 2015. 2018. 2020. Every birthday. Every single year. Someone had marked them all. Daisy's eyes filled with tears. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Why do you know me?" The room offered no answer. Only silence. The kind of silence that holds its breath. Waiting. Daisy reached for the doorknob. Her hand shook violently. Part of her wanted to run. To leave. To pretend she'd never seen any of this. Because some truths change your life. And some truths change who you believe you are. Slowly. The door opened. Warm light spilled into the hallway. Daisy stepped inside. And the world stopped. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Covering every wall. Daisy at age 5. Daisy holding a pumpkin at school. Daisy crying at graduation. Daisy feeding ducks at the lake. Daisy asleep on a bus. Daisy laughing. Daisy lonely. Daisy living a life she thought no one had ever seen. A sob escaped her lips. Oh my God. There were pictures she'd never known existed. Moments no stranger should have witnessed. Moments so private. Only someone who loved her would have kept them. At the center of the room stood a wooden table. And on it, a stack of birthday cards. 23 of them. One for every year she'd been alive. All unopened. And resting beside them was a framed photograph. An old man sitting in a silver sedan, watching an orphanage window, crying. Daisy felt her knees buckle, because suddenly she remembered the snow, the smile, the tears, and for the first time in her life, she realized that old man had never forgotten her, and somehow that hurt even more than being abandoned. Daisy stood in the middle of the room, unable to move. Photographs covered every wall. Not posed portraits, not stolen snapshots. Moments, tiny, ordinary moments she thought no one had ever noticed. Daisy sitting alone in the school cafeteria. Daisy carrying groceries home in the rain. Daisy reading under a tree at St. Mary's. Daisy holding Lucky for the first time. Daisy laughing. Daisy crying. Daisy, living a life she had always believed nobody cared to see. Her knees gave way. She sank slowly onto the wooden floor, tears blurring the faces around her. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Why didn't you come for me?" The room offered no answer, only silence, and on the table before her, a stack of birthday cards, 23 of them. Tied neatly with a faded blue ribbon, Daisy wiped her eyes and reached for the first one. Age 1. Inside was a short note. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, as though the writer had stopped many times. "My little Daisy, today you turn 1. I don't know if you like cake yet. I don't know if you're afraid of thunder. I don't know if you have your mother's smile. I only know this. I miss you every single day. And I have no right to." Daisy's fingers trembled. "Your mother." She quickly grabbed another card. Then another. Every birthday, every year, he had written to her, even though he never sent them. At the bottom of the stack was a larger envelope, different from the others. On the front, written in careful black ink, "For when you're ready." Daisy stared at it for a long moment. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew. This letter would change everything. Slowly, she opened it. The paper inside was old, folded carefully, and at the top, just 3 lines. "Daisy, if you're reading this..." "Then I have finally run out of time." Her heart began to race. She kept reading. "My name is William Hayes, and I am your grandfather." Daisy stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt beneath her. She read the sentence again and again, but the words didn't change. Grandfather. She had spent her entire life wondering if she had grandparents, wondering if anyone shared her eyes, her smile, her laugh, and now, suddenly, she wasn't alone anymore. Tears rolled silently down her face. She continued reading. "Your mother was my only child. Her name was Emily. She laughed too loudly, loved too deeply, and forgave people far more easily than I ever could." A faint smile appeared through Daisy's tears. Emily. Her mother finally had a name. Not just a blank space, not just an unanswered question. She was Emily, a young woman who laughed loudly, just like Daisy sometimes did. Then the letter changed. The handwriting grew shakier. When Emily was 20, she fell in love with a young mechanic. "I hated him. I thought he wasn't good enough. We argued. I said things a father should never say. Daisy swallowed hard. Emily left home. I thought she'd come back. Pride is a cruel thing. It convinces you there's always tomorrow." The next sentence was stained, as though tears had fallen onto the paper years ago. "There wasn't. Emily died giving birth to you." A sharp pain shot through Daisy's chest. She covered her mouth. "No." She shook her head. "No." But the words remained. For 23 years, she had imagined 1,000 stories. None of them looked like this. "I lost my daughter. And in losing her, I lost myself. 3 months later, I suffered a stroke. The doctors said I wasn't strong enough to raise a baby. My sister begged me to let Saint, Mary's, care for you. She promised it would only be temporary. But temporary became years, and years became shame." Daisy squeezed the letter tighter. All her life she had believed. Nobody wanted me. Nobody came. Nobody cared. And suddenly, that story no longer felt true. Not completely. Not anymore. She kept reading. "The first time I visited you, you were 3 years old. You were sitting in the garden, drawing flowers. I asked Sister Margaret what they were. She smiled and said, 'Daisies.' They're her favorite. Daisy laughed softly through her tears. Daisies, the flower she'd loved her whole life. And somehow, he remembered. I wanted to tell you who I was. God knows I tried. But every time I saw your face, I saw Emily. And all I could think was, you deserve better than me. Anger suddenly rose inside her. Hot. Sharp. You should have told me, she whispered. You should have come. The room stayed silent. But the letter continued. On your 8th birthday, I stood outside the orphanage window. Daisy froze. A memory flashed through her mind. Snow falling. Birthday candles. A man standing outside, crying. I prayed you'd wish for toys. Or candy. But afterward, Sister Margaret told me what you wished for. Daisy's hands began to shake. You said, please let there be one person who's glad I was born. The tears came instantly, because she remembered every word, every ache, the loneliness of being 8 years old and believing nobody wanted you. William wrote, Daisy, I wanted to run to you. I wanted to tell you, there has never been a day I wasn't grateful you were born. But I was a coward, and cowards mistake silence for love. Daisy pressed the letter tightly against her chest. For years, she had carried the pain of being abandoned, and William had carried the pain of abandoning. Neither of them had healed. Neither of them had been free. The hurt didn't disappear, not even close. But for the first time in her life, Daisy began to wonder if the saddest thing wasn't that she had grown up without love. Maybe the saddest thing was discovering she had been loved all along, quietly, imperfectly, from a distance. And sometimes, love hidden behind regret can break your heart, even more than love that never came at all. Daisy didn't leave the room until sunset. The letter remained folded in her lap. William Hayes, her grandfather. The words still felt strange. Too heavy. Too late. She should have hated him. A part of her did. For every birthday he missed. For every Christmas she spent staring out the orphanage window. For every moment she needed someone and found no one. But another part of her, the little girl who used to pray for just one person to love her, couldn't stop asking, what if he really did? The next morning, Daisy returned to the room. This time, she looked beyond her own photographs. There were cabinets she hadn't opened, shelves tucked into corners, boxes stacked neatly against the wall, each one labeled with a name, not hers, Aidan Brooks, Sarah Whitman, Noah Reed, Emily Foster, children, teenagers, young adults. Most of them had once lived at St. Mary's. Daisy frowned. What did they all have in common? She picked up the nearest box. Inside was a handmade birthday card, a report card with straight A's, a pair of tiny ballet shoes, and beneath them, receipts, school tuition, medical bills, winter coats, all paid for by one man, William Hayes. Daisy stared at the papers, then opened another box, and another, the same thing, a scholarship, dental care, college books, a first bicycle, a violin, a train ticket to a new life. The names were different. The stories were different, but the handwriting on every receipt was the same. William Hayes. By afternoon, Daisy sat surrounded by open boxes. Her tears had dried, replaced by something more painful, understanding. William couldn't save his daughter. He couldn't raise his granddaughter. But somehow, he had spent the rest of his life trying to save everyone else. A quiet kind of redemption. The kind nobody applauds. The kind no one even notices. Until it's too late. That evening, Daisy visited Mr. Lawson. The attorney smiled sadly when she walked in. "You found the room." It wasn't a question. Daisy nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mr. Lawson looked down at his coffee. "Because he asked me not to." Daisy frowned. "Why?" The old attorney sighed. "Because William never forgave himself." He stared out the window for a moment. "You know, every month he'd drive to St. Mary's. Never went inside. Just sat in his car." Daisy looked away. The silver sedan. The old man in the snow. The tears. "He watched you graduate." Mr. Lawson continued quietly. "He paid for your braces. He bought Lucky his vaccinations." Daisy blinked. "What?" Mr. Lawson smiled. "You thought the shelter paid for them." Daisy sat speechless. Last year, when Lucky got sick, a stranger had anonymously covered the bill. The veterinarian never told her who. William. It had been William. "He knew you worked at Miller's," Mr. Lawson said. "He used to eat there." Daisy frowned. "No, I would have remembered." Mr. Lawson chuckled softly. "He sat in the corner booth every Tuesday. He always ordered coffee. And never took his eyes off you." Daisy's breath caught. The corner booth. The old man with the gray coat. The one who tipped too much. Who smiled shyly. Who once told her, "You have a kind heart. Don't let the world harden it." Tears filled her eyes. Oh my God. That night, Daisy returned to the house. The silence felt different now. Not lonely. Not haunted. Sad? Yes. But also full of love. Love that had nowhere to go. She walked through the kitchen. Touched the chair William used to sit in. The mug still beside the sink. The reading glasses on the table. She imagined him here. An old man drinking coffee. Staring at photographs. Wondering if she'd ever forgive him. Daisy stepped outside. Snow crunched beneath her boots. The gazebo stood quietly beneath the moonlight. The place that had once frightened her now felt sacred. She sat on the wooden steps. Lucky rested beside her. And for the first time since reading the letter, Daisy spoke out loud. "I don't forgive you." The words surprised her. She swallowed hard. "Not yet." A tear slipped down her cheek. "But..." She looked toward the house, toward the room filled with photographs, toward a lifetime of silent love. "I don't hate you anymore either." The wind moved softly through the trees, and somehow she felt less alone. The next morning, Daisy made a decision. She wasn't going to sell the house. She wasn't going to lock away William's secrets. And she certainly wasn't going to let this place disappear. There were too many stories here. Too many people who had once felt abandoned. Just like she had. Daisy looked around the room beneath the gazebo. At the boxes. The letters. The memories. Then she whispered softly, "Nobody should feel forgotten." The words hung in the air. Simple, but powerful. And in that moment, without fully realizing it, Daisy Carter stopped being the little girl waiting at the window and became someone else. Someone who could open the door, not only for herself, but for everyone still waiting to be loved. Winter slowly loosened its grip on Willow Creek. The snow began to melt. Tiny green shoots pushed through the frozen earth, and for the first time in years, Daisy Carter felt something she barely recognized. Hope. The house no longer felt like a stranger. Every morning, she opened the curtains and let the sunlight spill across the hardwood floors. Every afternoon, she dusted shelves William hadn't touched in years, and every evening, she sat beneath the gazebo, reading the letters he had written but never sent. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she got angry all over again. Healing, she was learning, wasn't a straight road. It twisted. It circled back. It hurt. But little by little, it moved forward. Word spread quietly around Willow Creek. People began stopping by. An elderly woman brought a basket of cookies and said, "William paid for my grandson's surgery." A retired teacher showed Daisy an old scholarship check. "He never wanted anyone to know," the man said, his voice shaking. A young mother left flowers on the porch. "He helped me when nobody else would." Daisy listened to every story, and the more she heard, the less she understood. If William had been such a generous man, why had he spent his whole life hiding? Why had he loved from a distance? Why had he chosen silence? One rainy afternoon, while cleaning the study, Daisy discovered an old metal box hidden behind a bookshelf. It was covered in dust, locked, and unlike everything else in the house, there was no key. Across the lid, written in William's neat handwriting, were 4 words. "Do not open yet." Daisy frowned. She almost laughed. The man had hidden an underground vault filled with secrets, and apparently he'd still found more places to hide things. She placed the box aside, but all evening she couldn't stop thinking about it. At night she dreamed, not of William, but of her mother, Emily, a woman she'd never met. In the dream, Emily stood beneath the gazebo, young, beautiful. Her dark hair danced in the wind. She smiled at Daisy with eyes full of sadness. Then she pointed toward the orchard behind the house and whispered, "Not everything is buried underground." Daisy woke up with tears on her cheeks. The words echoed in her mind. Not everything is buried underground. The next morning, she grabbed a shovel. Lucky barked excitedly and raced ahead. The orchard behind the house was old. Most of the trees no longer bore fruit. Their branches twisted toward the sky like tired hands reaching for heaven. Daisy walked slowly between them. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that some instinct, was pulling her forward. Then she saw it. An enormous oak tree stood near the edge of the field. Its trunk was scarred with 2 initials, plus E, William and Emily. Daisy stopped breathing. Beneath the tree sat an old wooden bench, weathered, forgotten, and tucked beneath it, a rusted tin box, hidden carefully, as if someone had wanted it found, but only by the right person. Daisy knelt. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside lay a photograph. A young William, smiling. Beside him stood Emily. She couldn't have been older than 20. And in her arms, a newborn baby. Daisy. Fresh tears filled her eyes. This was the first photograph she'd ever seen of her mother, and the first picture of herself as a baby. She touched Emily's face gently, trying to memorize her, the curve of her smile, the softness in her eyes, the way she held Daisy as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Beneath the photograph rested a small journal, Emily's journal. Daisy's heart began to race. Slowly, she opened it. The first page read, June 14th. Dad says I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe he's right. But I've never loved anyone the way I love Michael, and I'm not afraid anymore. Daisy smiled through her tears. Her mother sounded brave and stubborn, just as William had described. She turned the page. October 2nd. Dad hasn't called. I pretend it doesn't hurt, but every night I dream he forgives me. Another page. December 21st. The baby kicked today. I wish Dad could feel it. I wish he knew how much I still love him. Daisy closed her eyes. All her life she had imagined bitterness, resentment, hatred. But her mother had never stopped loving William. Not for a single moment. She flipped to the final pages. The handwriting grew shakier, uneven, as though written with trembling hands. March 8th. If something happens to me, tell Dad I never blamed him. Tell him I was stubborn too. Tell him. I hope he forgives himself. Daisy froze. March 8th? Her birthday. The day Emily died. A tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. At the bottom of the box was one final envelope, unopened, addressed simply, William Hayes. Daisy frowned. The seal had never been broken. For more than 23 years, William had never opened it. Why? Slowly, carefully. Daisy slid her finger beneath the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, only one sentence, written in Emily's trembling handwriting. William, Daisy isn't your punishment. She's your second chance. Daisy covered her mouth, and suddenly, everything changed. William hadn't stayed away because he didn't love her. He stayed away because he believed he didn't deserve her. He had spent 23 years punishing himself, watching from afar, loving quietly. Terrified that his presence would only cause more pain, Daisy looked toward the house, toward the gazebo, toward the room filled with photographs and birthday cards. For the first time, she felt something new. Not forgiveness, not yet, but compassion for a lonely old man who had lost his daughter and nearly lost himself. The wind moved softly through the orchard. Lucky rested his head on Daisy's lap. She looked down once more at Emily's final words. She's your second chance. And a strange thought entered her mind. What if William wasn't the only person who needed a second chance? What if there were others? Others carrying regret. Others hiding from love. Others convinced they were beyond forgiveness. Daisy looked toward the gazebo, toward the vault of stories hidden beneath it. And for the first time, an idea began to take shape. An idea that would change not only her life, but the lives of countless others. She just didn't know it yet. Spring arrived quietly in Willow Creek. The snow melted. The orchard behind the house bloomed once again. And somehow, so did Daisy. Not all at once. Healing never works that way. Some mornings she still woke up angry. Angry at William for waiting too long. Angry at fate for taking her mother. Angry at all the birthdays she spent believing she was unwanted. But then she'd walk into that room beneath the gazebo. The room filled with photographs. 23 birthday cards. A music box never given. And she'd remember, love isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's an old man sitting alone in a silver sedan while snow falls outside, crying because he's too ashamed to knock on the door. And somehow, that thought softened her. And little by little, one Saturday morning, Daisy carried a wooden sign into the front yard. Lucky trotted behind her, older now, slower too, but still unwilling to leave her side. Daisy planted the sign beside the gazebo. The words were simple. The House of Second Chances. No grand opening. No ribbon cutting. No newspaper announcement. Just a sign. And an open door. The first visitor came 3 days later. Her name was Martha, an elderly woman with trembling hands and tired eyes. She stood on the porch, clutching a shoebox. I heard this place belonged to William Hayes, she said nervously. Daisy smiled. It did. Martha shook her head gently. No. Tears filled her eyes. I think it belongs to people like us now. Inside the shoebox were old photographs, a wedding ring, and dozens of letters she'd written to her daughter. Letters she'd never sent. I haven't spoken to her in 18 years, Martha whispered. I don't know how to fix it. Daisy poured her a cup of tea, sat beside her, and said the words she wished someone had said to William long ago. Maybe it's not too late. Martha cried. Really cried. The kind of crying that comes after carrying sadness for too many years. And for the first time, Daisy understood. The gazebo wasn't built to hide secrets. It was built to heal them. After Martha came others, a widower carrying his late wife's scarf, a retired soldier who hadn't spoken about the war in 50 years, a mother grieving the son she'd lost to addiction, a man who admitted he hadn't called his brother in 2 decades because pride had become easier than forgiveness. Daisy never judged, never interrupted, never rushed anyone. She simply listened. Because she had learned something, everyone carries a hidden room inside their heart, a room filled with regrets, with apologies left unsaid, with memories too painful to revisit. And sometimes, all we need is someone brave enough to sit beside us in the dark. One evening, near sunset, Sister Margaret came to visit. Daisy hadn't seen her in months. The old nun moved more slowly now, but her smile, that never changed. She looked around the house, at the flowers blooming beside the porch, at the children laughing in the yard, at the lantern glowing softly inside the gazebo. Then she looked at Daisy and began to cry. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "you finally found your family." And Daisy smiled. For years, those words were all she'd ever wanted to hear. But strangely, they didn't hurt anymore, because now she understood. Family isn't only blood. It isn't only the people who raise you. Sometimes, family is the people who choose to stay, the people who forgive, the people who love after they've been hurt. At night, after everyone had gone home, Daisy walked alone to the orchard. The old oak tree stood quietly beneath the stars, its bark still marked with the initials. Plus E, William and Emily. She sat on the bench beneath it, the same bench where she'd found her mother's journal, the same bench where decades of love and regret had waited patiently for her. For a long time, she said nothing. Then finally, she looked up at the stars and spoke softly. "I wish we'd had more time." The wind moved gently through the branches. "I was so angry." Her voice trembled. "And maybe a part of me always will be." Tears filled her eyes. "But," she smiled through them, "I'm not angry enough to forget how much you loved me." A tear slipped down her cheek. Daisy laughed softly. "You know, I used to pray for one person. Just one person who was glad I was born." The orchard remained silent, but somehow it didn't feel empty, because now she knew there had been someone, all along, an imperfect man, a frightened man, a man who made terrible mistakes, but a man who never stopped loving her, not for one day, not for one birthday, not for one lonely night. Daisy closed her eyes, and for the first time in 23 years, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt loved, not the kind of love you see in movies. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And sometimes, real love is the most miraculous thing of all. As she walked back toward the house, the lantern inside the gazebo glowed warmly in the darkness. A beacon for the lonely, for the grieving, for anyone carrying a heart too heavy to carry alone. Daisy paused at the gate and looked back one last time. The little girl who used to sit by the orphanage window, waiting for someone to come, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned that broken hearts can heal, that forgiveness is stronger than regret, and that sometimes the people who love us most don't always know how to say it, but love, real love, always finds its way home, and when it does, it doesn't just change your life. It teaches you how to change someone else's. Maybe that's the hardest truth in life. Not everyone who loves us knows how to love us the right way. Some people love through words, others through sacrifice, and some love quietly, so quietly we mistake their silence for indifference. Daisy spent 23 years believing she had been abandoned. William spent 23 years believing he didn't deserve forgiveness. One carried loneliness, the other carried regret, and both of them lost precious time. Maybe that's why we shouldn't wait too long. Too long to say, "I'm sorry." Too long to say, "I forgive you." Too long to tell someone, "I'm glad you were born." When Daisy was 8 years old, she sat alone in the orphanage and made a wish. "Please, let there be one person, just one person, who's glad I was born." For years, she believed nobody answered, but she was wrong. There was someone. There had always been someone. An imperfect man, a frightened man, a man who made terrible mistakes, but a man who never stopped loving her. Years later, standing beneath the gazebo, Daisy held William's photograph close to her heart. She smiled through tears and whispered, "You know, I got my wish." And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt loved, deeply, imperfectly, completely, because sometimes we spend our whole lives searching for love, only to discover that love has been searching for us too.